Hi, Bruce. Thanks for being here. I'm going to mute this. All right. Bruce, can you hear me a bit better now or worse still?
It's about the same. It's kind of quiet, but
Okay.
if there's no audio in the other one, it's fine. If there's both, it's hard to compete.
Yeah, I think that's both. Well, hopefully the recording of our conversation live premiere on YouTube will work out just fine with no problems. So, and then we'll do some questions after, and I'm going to check on the other slides to see where we're at. But thanks for being here, everybody.
CEOs believe that strategic planning and strategic thought is critical to their organization.
Oh, I thought you were going to say total crap. So
No. They all believe it's now I'll tell you the punchline. And then the second part of it is that 95%, and it's like 97 to 94, but you get the idea. 95% say they don't have time for it.
Mm-hmm. Bruce, how's the volume on your side?
That sounds great.
What's happening, folks? Anthony Taylor here with this week's episode of the Strategy and Leadership Podcast. I'm grateful to be here with you, as I am every single week. If you haven't yet, be sure to subscribe, like, and share. Do those things. Follow us on YouTube. And then, of course, you can connect with me on LinkedIn, Anthony C. Taylor 604, because home is Vancouver, BC. If you are in Vancouver, BC or thereabouts, we're doing a lot more local stuff come 2026. So please reach out to learn more about that. You know, one of the things that we really focus on the Strategy and Leadership Podcast, the podcast you're listening to today, is some practical takeaways that you can drive forward as a leader, as a manager, as an owner to drive forward your organization. Now, my next guest, Bruce Fojak, you know, one of the things that really appealed to me when I get people who ask, hey, can I be on the show? Can I be on the show? Agents, etc. And Bruce, you know, his experience in innovation in cool organizations, building cool tech, A, fascinated me, B, he's an awesome dude. But C, I think it takes something to do it for the length of career, to be able to continually innovate, continually bring things forward. And I think as we enter this world in 2026, I think innovation, not necessarily in the technical sense, but the foundational principles of strategic thinking, of adapting, about putting the right guardrails in place to be able to create the outcomes that you need are critical. In addition to all of the work that Bruce has done, he's written tons of publications, author of books through Stanford University Press. I will spare you the CV, but I will let Bruce take care of that for you.
That's quite the intro,
Bruce, how are you today?
You sound pretty good. Like you sound like
great,
a pretty
Anthony.
good
Thanks
guy
for having
here.
me here. This is just wonderful to be here to talk to you.
It is my pleasure. I did my best too. I mean, I did a little bit about your work as a board advisor, author, that kind of stuff. But you want to give our listeners kind of Cole's notes, Cliff notes in terms of who you are and what you love doing?
Yeah, you know, right now I work with companies of really all sizes, but primarily mature companies and mature industries. And I help them really explore renewal. So within innovation, there are a lot of ways to look at that. I tend to emphasize renewal, although I do also help companies at times on things like continuous improvement. I'll give you just a real quick background about how I even got here. I'm an engineer by education and was a bench research engineer for a number of years at a federal defense lab. Went into work in industry in a corporate group, and at that time picked up an MBA. And after that, I went into more of a business unit. So I've had background both in corporate groups, in business units. They're different in how they approach strategy and how they approach innovation. And then in 1999, I moved to the University of Illinois, and I had served as an associate dean in the College of Engineering there for approaching 20 years. And while I was there, I conducted research on innovation. So I've been a practitioner, I've been an executive, I've been a researcher. As you mentioned, I've sat on boards, and so have kind of a broad set of experiences in innovation. And again, just delighted to be here today.
Excellent. Well, likewise. So let's talk about renewal. And in our pre-call, and for those of you watching on YouTube or what have you, you see, you know, behind Bruce is a bunch of prints from Chicago from, you know, the 1930s. 100 years later, we were talking about the landscape of Chicago. By the way, for those listeners for a while, I mentioned I'm a Bears fan and always enjoy an opportunity to get back to Chicago, not just for pizza. But let's talk about renewal. Let's talk about innovation. Let's talk about organizations that have been perhaps around for 100 years, and maybe not 100 years, maybe 50 years. and they're finding themselves in a place where they need to think about renewal, they need to think about the future, they need to think about adaptation. Without giving advice, how do you approach renewal? How do you approach reinventing one's business, organized enterprise, and the impact that it can have? Just a softball question for our first one.
Yeah, no, this is great. Thanks, Anthony. I'm going to give you two parts of an answer here. First is that what happens with really any company in any industry, it goes through product life cycle, and in most industries start small, they're kind of nascent, a lot of different potential solutions are out there. And at some point, if there's something really there that people will want to buy, rapid growth occurs. And during that rapid growth, there's consolidation, there's the shakeout. And then after that growth period, there's maturity. And, depending on the industry, depending on the type of, in many cases, technology, those S curves will occur either very slowly or very quickly, but they always occur. And so what I find is that companies at maturity have usually shed much of their ability to renew by the time they get to maturity. And what they're doing at that point is they tend to focus on all good things. So to be really clear, I never say don't do Lean Six Sigma implementations. I don't say don't try to, if you will, optimize product designs and things like that. But they lose sight of how to renew their business. And so one of the first things that I recommend to companies, and maybe this isn't quite the answer you're looking for in terms of giving recommendations, but I'll throw it out there, is to just do an assessment and ask yourselves, do you have the core capabilities to be able to innovate? And, that assessment can be just answering 3 questions. It can be answering really, a couple of dozen questions, depending on how deep you want to go. But usually in the first few hours of interaction, if a company's honest with itself, it can determine where it is and where it might or might not be able to proceed.
Bruce, I'm going to pause us here, and hopefully you can still hear me. Any other thoughts on that as a reflection in terms of, the S curve? And it's interesting, I'm in the podcast, but I don't get to process fully. But anything else that you want to share in terms of those, what innovation questions to ask or what to reflect on, et cetera?
Yeah, the big questions that I focus on, there's like 2 tiers. The simplest tier, and I apologize, Anthony, we probably get into this a bit later. Do you have alignment within the company? Do you have very simple processes that help you make small bets? And do you have the people who have the ability to have innovative insights? And I don't mean just caffeinated creators, but people who actually deeply understand the situation. That's kind of the 0 order assessment that I think every company should make. And then there's probably about a dozen other questions that you can parse out from that. And a lot of those relate to things like, do you have a strategy in place? And by that, I don't mean, a lot of companies say, oh, I've got 5 pillars, people and initiatives. Or I'm not talking about that. I'm saying, are you trying to be differentiated, and in what way are you trying to differentiate or focus relative to the competition? Do you have financial metrics in mind? And I just mentioned that because both of those relate to alignment. If you don't have a strategy, and if you don't have metrics established ahead of time, people can either argue for or against an idea kind of arbitrarily. And so usually, companies should say, yeah, we're X number of tens of millions or hundreds of millions of dollars in revenue and or billions of dollars in revenue. And we're looking for something of this size with this kind of return. And it begins to facilitate those decisions in ways that they get, put off. So, Anthony, that's just kind of breaking down that one topic of alignment. And, you can do similar things on this related to processes. Which processes do you have? Why do you have them designed the way you do? Are they really a fit with the culture and the strategy that your company's pursuing? These are all things that can be, really assessed, I'd say relatively quickly. I'd say that I'd mentioned, I think in the video, within a few hours, you begin to get a sense of things. This doesn't need to be a long process, although it can be. It can be a real deep dive. In fact, I'm just coming off of a strategic assessment with a company where we've been at this for several months. But, it's those kinds of things, asking those questions and, asking tough questions.
Yeah. So going through the process of asking questions, reflecting, setting the end target, and making sure that if there are targets, then it helps you, clear out between yes or no, whatever you want to do, and start the point there. All right, well, we'll see what past Bruce had to say, and we'll go from there.
So, I think it suggests that an organization has the intelligence. I mean, I'm gonna de-intellectualize this.
Go for it.
You as an outside partner, whether it's academia or otherwise, you can see it. Sometimes everybody on the outside can see it before folks on the inside can see it. So even doing an assessment or starting with assessment suggests that they recognize where they are at the curve and they have reached maturity. We did a webinar recently, and a lot of the questions I got back was, how do I drive this forward if I don't have buy-in from my CEO? And like the CEO is, as a CEO, you have pride wrapped up in it. You have ego wrapped up in it. And you don't want anybody to come and tell you, hey, this isn't working. But the CEO is always the last.
Interesting that, when we were talking about it, that was the part of like the resistance, whereas, what you shared here, like the critical part is getting that alignment and getting the alignment top down. And in this case, it sounds like bottom, the folks seeing needing to innovate, and then the resistance being there.
And it can go either way. It can be, and you can have resistance or, I'll phrase it another way, a lack of full commitment or full buy-in. And again, not buy-in to make a big investment, but buy-in to determine if there's value there. If that's missing, it's hopeless. But
yeah. Also, watching myself in hindsight is less optimal, but
it's good. You're doing good. You're asking great questions. So
thanks, Ruth. All right,
Last one to kind of get the memo about where the business is. So I don't exactly know what my question is, because I guess the question is, how do organizations know they are at maturity in that S curve and need to consider reinnovation?
Yeah, usually profits are squeezed, margins are squeezed. They're competing pretty much on cost, even though they may not admit to it. One of the questions I love to ask people for example, just even workshops in companies, is to identify some success stories of where they've renewed, and to give me their biggest success stories of when and where they've renewed. And you can tell when they give stories that they're nice, they're good. Again, I don't want to be, patronizing, but they're not really renewing the business. And that's a way to reflect back to a lot of companies about whether they're, I don't want to say being dishonest or not, but whether they're really seeing things as they are. And so that's one thing, is just to reflect back to them what they've been doing. The other thing, though, you really hit on an important topic. I often tell people that there are three big ideas in innovation. And the first one is alignment within the organization of all things. And the other, just as a quick aside, would be having simple processes. And the other is having the right people to be able to make this happen, the exemplars of innovation. But in alignment, if you don't have alignment on two big questions, should we even innovate is the first question. And the second one is, should we work on this particular project? And I've got to tell you, a big part of innovation is moving the organization, and it's moving it from within. And, you'd mentioned a couple of the books that I had worked on, the Serial Innovators book that was published in 2012. A big part of what we observed is that the people who were successful innovators in mature companies, they were able to navigate that internal organization and bring people with them. And that is not easy.
Yeah, I mean, for all of us, everything that we do as it relates to strategic planning.
Anything you want to add about that? Like, should we do this change resistance, internal planning piece?
no, those are all. I still fully buy into that. The one thing about people bringing the organization with them, the best innovators are serving customers. They're serving executive management. They're serving shareholders. They're serving their colleagues in the organization. I don't want to make them sound so dramatically, amazing, but in many respects, they're pretty amazing people. They're trying to drive this to the benefit of everybody. And when you start seeing that, you've got something special.
Yeah, I love that. I think it's just so interesting, like when businesses start up as entrepreneurs, like it's driven on will and grit and self-interest. And then when organizations have to go through this renewal process, it's commitment, it's, like doing your job, it's fun and hopefully more fun versus parts that are dire. One of the things that I thought was interesting, just the reflection for leaders to say, hey, are we going through real renewal? Like, are we going through the right appropriate questions? Are we going through the motions? And I think you find out if you're doing that one of two ways: honest questions, or, you know, your back is against the wall because you haven't been doing it long enough and you've been going through the motions for a little bit too long.
Yeah, Anthony, it's perfect. I often refer to that as playing musical chairs, and where are you when the music stops? So you can do, people talk about innovation theater. You put on a show of this, and you talk about your capabilities, but you kind of look under the hood, and maybe there's not a whole lot coming out of it. Maybe it's the engineer in me, but I don't enjoy that. To me, that's kind of shallow, but.
Yeah. And sometimes you can just go, if you're going through that, you can say, hey, are we really doing it, or is there something that's stuck? And then it's an opening for a conversation of like, we're doing our best, but we're resource constrained here, or we're skills constrained, or whatever.
Yeah, I love that. I love using those hiccups or roadblocks as being an indicator for how to improve. So yeah, I agree.
Awesome. So, folks, what are you going to do today? What questions are you going to have with your team to support continued renewal? We're going to run out of time here, Bruce. Not that we thought we wouldn't, but let's just keep going and we'll get to what we get.
As you see fit.
Getting alignment, getting people bought in, having those conversation. You have to have the willingness. And then I was going to ask, how do you incorporate that culturally? Like, it needs to be a being. You need to be curious. I joke that engineers are often right, and there's one way, and it's whatever the engineer way is. And so, when that juxtaposed with curiosity and balancing that there might be other perspectives or other ways, have you found in your 106 publications that curiosity component and that cultural component needs to be there? Is it internal, or does it need to be built? Can it be built? Like, what are your thoughts on evolving as a management team, or is it a function of just the personnel around the table?
Yeah, boy, that's a great question and wide ranging. I'll say when the culture isn't there, and I don't mean like bean bags and foosball tables. I mean, if the culture of really, how do I want to say this? Let me take a step back. The best cultures that I've seen have been cultures that have been grounded in what I would say is reality, the reality of what customer needs are, the reality of potential for technology, the reality of what other people in the organization will buy into. And so you really need people who are willing to somewhat dispassionately look at the situation and really get a shared understanding of what that reality is. And that's a bit different understanding than what most people think about in terms of an innovation culture. Because quite honestly, I'm not a big fan of give everybody 4 hours a week to innovate, or we have to let go of our hangups, because that's rarely the path to the renewal that I've observed. It's usually a deeper understanding. And the people who can dig deep, and I don't mean in an academic sense, I mean deeply understand customer needs, deeply understand how they work with technologies, those are the people that can very often, not always, bring people along. And I'll add, some of the best have almost been fired in the process. The stories you hear are remarkable.
Interesting. Okay. I mean, it is challenging to work through, and you have human beings to work through there. One of the other areas of study for you, and I'm sure if I just told people about high density exostonic Tate in two-dimensional multiple quantomic wells, and I'm sure I got a couple words there.
But you did pretty well, actually.
So thank you very much. I was trying to read it on the fly here. Quantum wells is what I would have said, or correlation of photoluminescence and electrical measurements and identifying contaminants and MBE-grown GAAs. That is such a different field of study, but I believe that all things are the same in nature. So what can we learn from that side of technology, photoluminescence, energy, and human beings and how they work in teams?
Yeah, it's wonderful that you've asked this, and I'm going to just mention this to the people listening. We've not discussed this, but this is a critical question, because in the end, innovation is a very human act of discovery. And I don't care if you're discovering how excitons work in gallium arsenide quantum wells, or if I'm discovering how best to work with you. But it's an act of discovery. And usually that act of discovery involves recognizing patterns in what's going on. And this is a whole separate area that I've published a bit on, Anthony, but not a lot. It's kind of a current area that I've been exploring for at least a dozen years now. And seeing these patterns, the best innovators are the ones that see patterns. And if you just give me a moment, I'll share a story. There's a colleague of mine. I won't mention her by name because even though I have permission to tell the story, I didn't ask about this particular situation. But an amazing innovator. She's created billion-dollar brands in a very large company. And she came to campus a few years back. We were having lunch, and I said, Nancy, how do you know what to do? Because this is really kind of at the heart of it. How do you innovate? How do you know what to do? And without looking up, she said, I see dead people. Now, I don't know if you've seen the movie The Sixth Sense.
I haven't, but
Okay.
I'm fairly familiar with the premise.
It's okay, though, because I had not seen it. And so my first thought is, well, this is kind of creepy. But what she was telling me, and then this led to probably 20, 30 minutes conversation. Essentially, what she was saying is that she sees patterns that other people don't see. It's not trying to make this mysterious or mystical. It's kind of like the best weather forecasters. They can see a little bit further out and what's going on. And at first, early in her career, she had a little bit of self-doubt about was she really seeing these things. She began to realize that she was. By noticing that, she could then help bring other people along. So, she applied this discovery to the chemical engineering of how to design the product. She applied it to understanding customer needs. She applied it to how to distribute these products and looked at it very holistically. So it's seeing patterns, and I sometimes refer to it as collecting and connecting the dots.
Bruce, any thoughts on that? Well, I really like the innovation human piece is like hit me like a ton of bricks, and there's like the systemic stuff in group, but then to your and Nancy's point, it's like it really drives from individuals' ability, capacity, and skill to be able to put those two things together. But any other reflections there?
Yeah, the one thing, and again, I don't think we covered this. A lot of people use phrases, and there's reasons for them saying this. They often say, or people often say, innovation is a team sport. And now I'm at a point where I say, well, what sport are we talking about? Because I'm not always convinced that quick answer is going to give you the right direction. What kind of teams are you thinking about? Because I think it's a very human act and it's a very personal act. And so the best teams are formed, I'll say, from the innovator seeing what expertise and people should join the team, rather than some, let's say VP assigning 5 or 10 people to a team. It's not always optimal to have people assigned. It's often better to recruit people, if you will. And that's why it goes back to this being a very personal act. And so I think that there's, I hate to call it nuance, but there's sufficient nuance that when people don't think about it, they can be led astray, and it can result in failure and a lot of wasted time and money.
Yeah, these initiatives are, millions, tens of millions, hundreds of millions. And so going through that, I'll take the opportunity to highlight, two people actually. So one, Joanne Garbin wrote a book, Innovation at Microsoft. Hopefully that's the name of the book. We just had her on for another episode. Phenomenal speaker leader, and she just put together like a studio for venture, and it's sounding really cool. So I hope you enjoyed that episode. But she spoke also on that culture. Also, just want to take the opportunity to highlight our editor, Red 9 Productions. Amazing skill, amazing capability. Chris, thanks for making great episodes for us. So if anybody's doing podcasts, needs an editor, reach out to them because they're awesome. But it's like the ability.
Yeah. By the way, they've been a pleasure to work with. By the way, the people at Red 9. So I just wanted to throw. I wouldn't have thought to mention that today. So consider that a unprepared comment.
No, I appreciate that. Yes, no, it's not a sponsored post, but just looking at all the stuff. So team sport, individuals, what are you coming to build? And then that other piece, we didn't talk about the shared reality, like what is the innovation culture? We talk a lot about culture, but not necessarily around like what is our culture specifically for innovation and how do we do it? I'm sure we could go on for a little bit more about that. Okay, we got 3 minutes left. Bruce, what are you taking away from today? What's next for you? Any other kind of parting words as we finish up the live stream? And folks, if you want to watch the rest of the episode, be sure to subscribe to the Strategy and Leadership Podcast. I'll let it run for a little bit, but I promised Bruce 30 minutes, so I'll just let it run and I will sit here if you want to keep watching. But anything else you want to leave our listeners?
No, I'm good. Again, Anthony, thanks. I can't tell you enough how much I enjoyed and appreciated talking to you, and now getting to know you a second time. In spite of the fact that the Bears lost the other day, we'll document that in this recording. But again, it's been a real pleasure, and I appreciate the opportunity.
Likewise, it was super fun. The Bears gave us a great season and will continue to. If anybody on the Bears organization wants to come and get on the podcast to talk about innovation, we would love to have you, Caleb, if you want. Come on.
I would love to hear that.
So,
Seriously.
Bruce, feel free to stick around. I'm going to let it run for folks because I got a bit of time, and then the chat's open. But I just want to say thank you for coming on today. Thanks for just the additional insights, for being on the show, and just again on a personal level, such a pleasure. And yeah, I just appreciate you a lot.
Yeah.
And so this is a very portable skill, this act of discovery, if you will. It's very human, and it varies by person too.
I mean, thank you for that. So I think like if you think of scientific intervention, and we actually thought about it 100 years ago, my first example was, Eureka, the bathtub flowing or gravity hitting you with an apple. You're recognizing things that occur in the world and then you bring it back to thing. So now in 2025, my experience of the world, both as a business owner and as a strategist, and my superpower is seeing long term and being able to predict trends, except for you also have to have the patience to sit through them, which is tricky. And so now in 2026, our firm over 15 years has been doing strategic planning, long range planning, helping people see around the corner. Now with the S curve that is innovation, things like AI, things like financial models, things like policy have turned over seemingly overnight. And, like major trends, they happen slow and then they happen fast.
Yeah.
How are you seeing in, I call it corporate America, and in boardrooms, are people still focused on the long term, or have they gotten their asses kicked so bad over the past year that they are like, maybe it's strategic projects, maybe it's responding, what are you seeing in your work? What are you seeing in your conversations with colleagues about how people are approaching strategic thinking and problem solving in 2025, 2026?
Yeah, boy, this is a great question. And I'm going to begin by saying what I've seen is it's all over the map, Anthony. There's a quote from a number of years back that actually we included in our No Excuses Innovation book that, and I'm not going to get it perfect, but it's going to be pretty close. It's something like 95% of CEOs believe that strategic planning and strategic thought is critical to their organization.
Oh, I thought you were going to say total crap. So
No. They all believe it's, well, now I'll tell you the punchline. And then the second part of it is that 95%, and it's like 97 to 94, but you get the idea. 95% say they don't have time for it.
Mm-hmm.
And so, and I've had a friend reflect back that, they work in their business, but not on their business. And so I think that's pervasive. And I think that's a challenge to innovation. And I've worked on how to frame innovation to maybe get around that, because I think in many cases, innovation isn't an investment like these other things we've talked about, like Lean Six Sigma. It's not an investment like defining a incremental new product. Innovation is really something more along the lines of an insurance policy investment, because you're trying to keep from getting kicked later. And it's also a financial option for future growth. And there are very different ways of looking at things. And so you should be carving out time for that. But I'm going to go back to the current example about what companies are doing with AI. And I'm literally today in the middle of an exchange with the owner of a mid-sized company, very successful mid-sized company. And I found that just in my just current interaction with him, he takes very much an approach of a process and an organizational structure view of how to approach AI. And I've come at it from a very people point of view, a very organic, emergent view. And I think that where we're at, my personal understanding is right now, and this has been, I'd say, confirmed. I was in a session with a couple of dozen innovation leaders in mid and large size companies. And what I've seen from them is that AI right now is still being explored on an organic basis by individuals. Some have looked at things like governance, but it's really too early in many cases to do too much governance, too much formal planning. And I believe it's a real test to the people in your organization. Do you have people who are willing to go out there on their own and explore? You mentioned curiosity. I think that's a way to describe it. But do you have people that are picking this up, that are self-motivated, and I'll say self-assembling to try to do these things? And that's hard. That's hard for executives to manage, because a lot of executives like to do things where they can control an outcome. I'm going to set up a structure. I'm going to set up a committee. And really what I'm asking them to do is to hire people that they can trust to move forward and do these things.
It's interesting that like intersection between what is the culture empowering people to lead innovation and then the guardrails to put that together, like all of those things kind of coming to congruent.
Yeah, the guardrail idea is an important one. It's one that because I've worked with such remarkable people, I sometimes forget that you do need guardrails. So it's a good way to phrase it.
Yeah, you just throw all of your company's data into a public GPT and anyway, that's not advice, by the way, everybody. Just
All of your clients' data in the public. Think
you
about
should
it.
be thrilled about that.
Be awful. So no, they had a very good point, but it's
Need structure.
What I hear from that is, it's not incorporated organizationally yet. Like the things you don't know. I don't know how to say it. Like, it's not happening within your locus of control. And so you can't manage it. It's a little bit uncertain. It's like, when you're working without a plan, you're just working and there's kind of like an area of discomfort. I am uncomfortable right now as a leader because I'm also trying to adapt, innovate without blowing the thing up, but then also responding to a bunch of people that I think are in the same boat. And so in some cases, it's the blind leading the blind in some areas, even though people really know it, and then throw in the human element to it, which everybody's just faking it in my professional opinion. Everybody's trying to hold their stuff together. Meanwhile, I won't get into the myriad of issues, but all of those things, I think it's harder than ever to be a leader. And I have a relatively short lens on,
well, I'm going to say
trends.
it's too early to have certainty about AI. I will tell you what I'm certain about is it's going to have a huge impact. But when will it have an impact? How will it have an impact? Are we in a bubble right now? I mean, I've lived through enough technological transitions in my life to say that this looks a lot like what was going on before the dot-com bubble burst in, what was that, 2000 or so, 2000, 2001. And there's today, a lot of investment in infrastructure, a lot of companies trying to figure out what's going on, a lot of fear going on. And you look at mature companies and mature industries. Many of them didn't embrace the internet early on, but they did in a manner and a time frame that was good for them. Yeah. So not everybody's going to be a big winner. Well, let me take a step back. Who are the big winners of the internet era? You've got Google. You eventually have companies like YouTube, eBay, Facebook. But in each domain, there's a big winner. But in terms of users,
a buttload of losers too.
Yeah, but no kidding. But then in terms of the users, people come along and they come along at their pace. And I'd be hard pressed to say that a lot of companies failed because they didn't embrace the internet as a user in a timely manner. And I think we're going to see something potentially similar with this. Now, there are some others that I've spoken to that say this could be different, and I respect that. But that's the question in my mind. Is this different, or is this what we were seeing 25 years ago?
I had the privilege of my dad being a nerd. And so I remember that, we were in a little closet and he had his computer there. And my dad was early stages on the internet. And my aunt jokes about, he would watch movies where a dude had the camcorder and, so anyways, that's early internet.
Yeah.
But it's interesting to hear, how people will approach these technologies as users. And like some are cautious, and then there's the first movers.
Yes.
And then, one of the famous companies in Vancouver, TELUS, apparently they're famously second movers. Like they will cautiously go. I think the challenge is patience. What I tell my 3-year-old son, and now I'm forcing myself to take my own medicine, is to be patient with all of this. The challenge is when you have a board of directors to report to, when you have staff to feed, when you have, you're trying to adapt and be patient and shrewd and prudent while also being aggressive, and you have goals to accomplish. So I think it's perhaps, I guess what I'm trying to land the plane on is, in some cases, it's a lot of wait and see and a collective unknown.
And if I can just riff
Please.
off of that for a
Yeah,
minute.
that's what we're here for.
I believe that there are clearly times to be a second mover or to wait and see. And I think for mature companies and mature industries, at some level, it's okay structurally to kind of just wait and see a bit. I mean, again, encourage people to use it, encourage people to try it, set up some simple things. I would never tell companies to not do that. But to overly establish structure, to overly establish governance, to overly establish training programs now when we don't even know what platforms are going to really survive, I'm not sure it's a good investment. But then there are other times when companies should be a first mover. And the example I'll give, and we've mentioned the books that I've co-authored. I'll hold this up. I don't know if you can see it in your screen, but this is the No Excuses Innovation book. And on the cover, there's a box cutter. And my colleague and co-author, Walter Herbst, and his son, Scott, co-invented this with an entrepreneur.
Wow.
And this is a time when being a first mover made sense, because box cutters had been around for, I'm going to say forever, but in our lifetimes, they've been around forever. And what their colleague TJ Scamone at Slice had this idea for is, I think I can make a better box cutter. And he worked with Walter and Scott. They deeply understood customer needs. They deeply understood technologies. They went out and they tested it at a trade show. They learned that some of their assumptions weren't 100% right, and they were able to pivot as a result of that. It's a wonderful story of being a first mover when you've got a bunch of people making box cutters not really addressing this. And the result is a box cutter like this, and it's sold very well. It is sold for reasons other than what they originally thought. It actually reduces insurance costs for companies that use it. So these are the things. And Anthony, this goes back to discovery. This is why innovation really is people discovering. And I think people have to discover, when do we move on AI? Do we need to be first mover or not? So that's, maybe a little bit of a long response, but hopefully this isn't going.
Bruce will probably finish it there, but I love it. I'm pretty sure your book is on, I want to say Stanford University Press, if I got that one right.
Yep.
And just, the innovation, creating a new product. One of Christian, who's the editor as well, he's one of our favorite bands is Tool. And one of the quotes I live my life by is, ride the spiral to the end. You may just go where no one's been. And in the case of this box cutter, it's like, you don't know what you're creating, what you're going to get out of it. But really, just by putting yourself through that innovation, you open the door to opportunities. You're like above the line, so to speak. And I think it says a lot. Closing comments. I got to go because I got another meeting, but closing comments for you. Anything else you want to?
No, just again, another big thank you.
Awesome. It was my pleasure, folks. Be sure to check out the episode, subscribe, like. If you got some other great authors, great speakers, always good to have good conversations. Caleb Williams, we look forward to seeing you on the show. And everybody, just stay safe out there. Thanks for being here. Thanks for watching. I hope you enjoyed today. And Bruce, thank you as well. We'll see you very soon. And until next time, everybody.